And you think medication is the tool? That's why so many kids are messed up now. Just because you're a pastor doesn't mean you know it all. Pastors have sin stained too. Oh, 20 years of experience, you're commercial now? You're 100% fraud. You call yourself a healer, comparing yourself to the Almighty? You want $100 to heal somebody in your backyard? Get your plastic ass off the pyramid scheme before you fall off. Those were the comments I received after a young woman had commented on Facebook that she got a diagnosis of depression. Medication was recommended, but she was going to rely on the power of God to heal her. The devil was a liar, and she wasn't going to claim that diagnosis. So I thought that I would encourage her as a pastor and as a psychologist, or to coin the phrase that I've termed a pastologist, I thought I would ask her to get a second opinion. You would have thought that I said I was the one who had given Moses the 10 Commandments. I got such backlash. And I have to tell you, I laughed about that plastic ass for a long time. But here's the thing that I realized. The young woman who said that she wouldn't take medication for her depression, and the young woman who gave her the advice to not to follow what a pastor said, because lots of people told her, you can be healed without medication. I believe that all of those people in some way were wounded by religion. And there are many folks who are wounded by religion. Wounded by a religion that says to them, you can't take medication for depression, you just need to pray about it. Far too many people are wounded by religious leaders, the misinterpretation of religious doctrine, by family, friends, and strangers who mean well, but give poor advice. Far too many people don't feel good about themselves, don't love themselves, don't believe in themselves. They live in that shadowy place of doubt, shame, and guilt. But I believe that if we are wounded by religion, we can be healed by the sacred. The sacred who says to us that we are divinely created and loved unconditionally. The sacred who prompts us to what I call tap into our sacred intelligence. That part of us that tells us that we can make good choices that manifest the greatness in us and the greatness in other people. But you see, people are wounded. They're wounded because they believe in a religion that says to them, if your husband beats you or your father beats you, you are to honor the man because he's the head of the household. Yes, I get people telling me that all the time. People who believe that they have to live with limited means because the Bible actually says that money is the root of all evil. Well, that's not actually what it says. But there are people who are wounded because they've been emotionally, sexually, or physically abused by those who are in the religious organizations. Now look, don't get me wrong, I'm a pastor. And so as a pastor and as a psychologist, I've seen the beauty of a religious organization or of faith that can help to build us up. And that helps to show us our passions and our brilliance, and that can help to propel us to live our purpose. I've seen the beauty of religion, which teaches us to lift other people up and comfort them when they need it. There is value in religious organizations. So I'm not here to tear that down. But what I am here to say is this. I have seen religious doctrine that is to the extreme wound people so deeply, that there are psychological implications for those wounds. For instance, I've seen people who are fearful. Now, one woman told me a story that her Hebrew teacher had this bright red hair, and every time he came in to teach her, she would hide under the table. Well, as a result, she was afraid of clowns. So I know that you might say that that's a minor thing, and maybe it is for her. But here's the thing. There are people who are fearful, and they live in fear that if they don't tithe, they're going to go to hell. There are people who live in guilt and shame and say that they have to take care of their mothers and fathers, even though their mothers and fathers may have been abusive to them. There are people who live with depression and anxiety because they say, I can't live the life that my religion is teaching me. I was created to be something else. I worked with someone who once tried everything he could not to be gay. He tried every medication there was, and he tried a few other things. He had severe depression and anxiety. The only thing he did not try was coming out of the closet because he feared rejection. And some of these people who are wounded by religion decide to abandon the sacred because they feel like the sacred has abandoned them. And then they walk out of any type of faith tradition. But the ultimate wounding is when we decide to kill or oppress other people because they have different religious beliefs than we do. When we decide that we're going to oppress a whole group of people because of a few things that radicals do, and we blame it on the religion itself. Sadly, when we do that, we miss out on the opportunity to grow by looking at another faith tradition or religion. We miss out on the opportunity to have some really great and amazing relationships. And not only that, we wound ourselves because we walk around in anger and hostility. We must begin to see the shared humanity in folks who look different from us, who think differently than us, and who believe differently than us. We have to move beyond our limiting beliefs that tell us that we have to fit into this perfect box, and we have to think and act in a certain way. Now, I believe that if we've been wounded by religion, the way we get past it is that we have to learn to center ourselves, to find the core of who we are, to find that place where the sacred lives. And so getting to the sacred is like walking a labyrinth. So during the summer, I had this wonderful opportunity to go to a silent retreat. And while I was at this retreat, I walked the labyrinth 4 times before I could find my center. So the first time I walked the labyrinth, this particular labyrinth had bricks and it had rocks. And so I thought I knew what I was doing, and I walked in the labyrinth, and pretty soon I realized that I didn't know where I was going in the labyrinth because I followed the bricks and not the rocks. So I turned around and I left, and I just went to just sit quietly until the guided walk. So when the person came along to guide us through the next step, there's a whole group of us going, and so she guided us correctly through the labyrinth. She took the rocks and not the bricks. I was so busy and so distracted by the person in front of me because she was walking so closely to the person in front of her that she had to keep stopping so she wouldn't step on her feet. And I kept saying, "Why don't you just back up?" I said it in my head, not to her. And so I just kept thinking, why don't you back up? There's plenty of room between me and you don't have to be bothered about stepping on her feet. But I was distracted, minding someone else's business. And so I physically made it to the center, but I wasn't centered. The third time I went through the labyrinth, I tried to force revelation. But I did a little reading and found out that you should invite your ancestors and your loved ones into the labyrinth with you. And so I did that. And it felt very peaceful when I did that. And I felt a lot of gratitude in that moment. And so it was good. But it wasn't until the 4th time when I just relaxed and allowed it to happen naturally. And I got to the center And I got some information that would help me to live my life's purpose. Our lives are like that labyrinth, wonderful and complicated. But when you get to the center, when you get to the core, there's something wonderful and amazing for all of us. And so when we walk through the labyrinth, sometimes we don't know the path. And that's what happens with religion sometimes. Sometimes we're confused by the language. We're confused by the interpretation. And when we're confused by it and when we get wounded by it, we stop and we turn the other way and we abandon religion. But what we really need to do as we continue our labyrinth walk is we need to ask someone to show us the way. Someone who can show us the way, but someone who will recognize that it really is more about relationship with the sacred as opposed to religion. And then when we continue this walk, we also need to be mindful and mind our own business. We can't help everybody else out there. Sometimes there's a need to focus on us. So we can't help them with their joys or their pains. We need to walk our own path. We can't worry about how they're walking their path. We may be walking in the same way, but our journey is different. And so we must focus on ourselves. We can get close enough to them so we can feel their energy, but by all means, don't absorb it too much so that you crumble. And then I invite us, as we continue on this labyrinth, that what we must do is to organically develop our relationship with the sacred, and then be in a place of gratitude. Because even when we are in pain, we can find something to be grateful for. And then finally, when we get to the center, I invite you to just bask and soak and saturate yourself in the sacred. Because it is there that you will find that you are divinely created and loved unconditionally. That's what it's about. The relationship with the sacred tells you that. If you look at any major religion, the core of it is love. And from my own faith tradition, I'd like to use a definition of love. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not boastful or arrogant or rude. Love does not insist on its own way. It is not resentful or irritable. Love does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but it rejoices in truth. And if your religion says to you that you are unworthy or unloved, it is not what the sacred would have. Because love bears all things. Love endures all things. Love hopes all things. Love never fails. So I invite you to find your labyrinth, to find your center, to find your core, because it is there that you will know that you are divinely created and loved unconditionally. And when you know that, you will be careful about what you do to yourselves. You will be careful about what you allow people to do to you. And you will be careful about what you do to other folks, because you will begin to see that there is a shared humanity. And that's what love is. So today, begin your labyrinth walk. Walk to the center. Get to the sacred. Bask in the knowledge that you are divinely created and loved unconditionally. And if you do that, if you have been wounded by religion, you will know that indeed you can be healed by the sacred. Thank you.